You are listening to the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast, where you discover management insights and strategies for your successful dental practice. There are also interviews with key people in the industry who have advice and services to help you and your team achieve great success. Welcome to this week's episode of the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast. And today we've got one of our returning presenters on behalf of Burke and Associates, Special Counsel for Burke and Associates, Liz Ong. Welcome back to the show, Liz.
Hi, Julie. Welcome and thank you again for inviting me to speak. It's been a while since we last spoke, and how have you been?
I've been good. We were speaking earlier. We've both gone through flus and COVID and all sorts of things over the last few weeks. And so you're fully recovered. I'm just about recovered. Yes, looking for healthier days ahead, that's for sure.
Yes, definitely. So, very excited, and thank you for having me today. I wanted to recap on my previous colleague. My colleague previously, Megan, has recorded an episode with you in December last year that was on the topic of important things to consider when purchasing a dental practice. So I thought it would be a good idea to give your listeners an episode on selling a dental practice.
That's a great idea. And as I mentioned to you earlier as well, there's been about 3 different dental practices that I've been in discussions with just over the past couple of months around the sale of their practice. And so this is very topical in my brain as well. Just before we do start, just that warning out there to all of the listeners that the information that Liz is going to be sharing with us today is absolutely general in nature. It is not designed to be advice at all. And if you do need any additional information regarding the sale of your dental practice or indeed the purchase of a dental practice, it is a very good idea to go to your legal counsel or to indeed contact Burke and Associates, whose contact links are all in the show notes, so you can get proper, customised, individualised advice for your specific situation.
Thank you, Julie.
But let's take it away, Liz.
Yes,
let's take it away.
Let's get straight into that, Julie. So, as the owner of a dental practice, and if you're considering selling, one of the most important things would be to consider at the outset with your professional advisor, why are you thinking of selling? Thinking this through is then likely to inform the selling process and strategy, and importantly, whether now is the right time to sell. I think all the sellers must be aware why they're selling and is it the right time. So the objective as well.
That's a really good point, Liz, because just with these previous 3 practices that I've been working with, a different reason to sell in each particular situation. And some of the reasons to sell can sometimes they're very good business savvy decisions, and they're based with, data and research, and this is the best possible time to sell the practice. Sometimes it could be because I'm fatigued and I don't want to utilize my life in terms of all the management that goes along with practice ownership. I just want to turn up and do my dentistry. Other times it can be family reasons, or you've sustained an injury yourself and you can't continue on. There are so many different reasons.
Yes, there are. That's so spot on, Julie. And that's why we have a few scenarios that we want to talk about, just to educate your listeners about the motive of their sale. That is important to know, because that would then touch on many other key points that would be important for the seller to understand the process as well thereafter. So, for example, the reasons could be that the dental practice is performing poorly, one or more of the owners are looking to retire, or one or more of the owners are seriously unwell, if you have said, or have passed away. One or more of the owners has lost interest in the business or has another opportunity that they want to pursue. The practice is in high demand for purchase, or it could be a sea change. There are so many reasons, but the seller has to be first clear about why do they want to do it, and if they are certain about it, how do you do it? So with so many of these reasons, selling the dental practice business may not be the most beneficial solution for the owner. So on this point, Let me talk through a few examples in detail. For example, if one of the owners becomes seriously unwell or dies, it is likely that this will come about suddenly and when the dental practice hasn't prepared for the practice to be sold. That is, the dental practice business may not be ready or geared up to sell to a third party at that point. Also, sometimes the remaining owners may very well want to continue with the business and have the necessary drive and vision to continue to grow the business. And so there may be other solutions that are better for the owners and the business overall. Then the other example we have is, are there any non-owner practitioners who are suitable to step up as owners of the business and who are interested in this? Again, this is about succession planning. We don't know how well the succession planning has been drafted, but these are the things that we need to talk about, think about, and if yes, this could enable the remaining owners to continue, the exiting owner to be bought out, and additionally and importantly, this would incentivize the other suitable non-owners practitioners to stay on at the practice. So we have spoken about, health, and then this is another issue about what if one wants to exit.
Yeah, and I know that I've spoken with Megan in the past, and possibly yourself as well, just the value of being flexible of mind when you are looking at long-term practitioners within your practice that may be currently employed as employees or contractors. If they are truly a benefit and value to the practice, it's such a great idea to bring them in as a partner. That keeps them with you. It takes out all the complexity around employee versus contractor arrangements. But it keeps the vibe of the practice, the culture of the practice, the reputation of the practice intact. So if one person does pass away or for whatever reason has to duck out urgently from their partnership, if they're replaced with a like-minded person, that's a wonderful scenario for the remaining partners that normally, under normal circumstances, wouldn't have chosen to sell right now.
Absolutely, Julie, because given the increasing issues with finding and retaining appropriately skilled practitioners at the host practice, the dental practice premises, this could effectively, solve a number of issues at the one time for the ongoing benefit of the practice, the dental practice business, and the clients and patients attending there. So it's not always about selling. It's also about continuing with the business. And that would bring more benefit for the business as well as the patients. I mean, the patient will still stay, business is on. So we'll talk about it in further details. So as a first step and consideration in this process, in certain situations, it might not actually be wise to sell your business at the time you are thinking. But there are those times when you should. It's absolutely worth it, and it can pay off tremendously. For example, at the end of well-thought-out succession plan where the practice has strong profits over at least the past 3 financial years, or strong projections for future maintainable earnings and perhaps a niche or specialty that sets it apart from other practice businesses. Even earlier than all of this though, there are also key considerations if you have future selling in mind when setting up the dental practice business at the start or when the current owners first purchase the business. For example, choosing the right business structure for a future sale from a tax perspective, or a structure that enables the practice business to grow, or even having a forward-thinking plan about how the business is going to be run and the profit goals for the purpose of any further sale. So really, after understanding why you want to sell, we will then ask the question, so what is the process for the vendor when preparing to sell a dental practice or practices in different locations in the case of a franchise or multiple locations or clinics? So let me just recap on what Megan has said. In Megan's December episode about buying a practice she covered, The pre-contract stage includes heads of agreement or term sheets, due diligence, engaging professional advisors early, and others. So it might be helpful in today's topic to talk about the post-sale contract signing process leading up to settlement. Yeah. Before we get to that though, I will also mention the important issue of the purchase price for your dental practice. I think everyone is conscious there is a price for the sale. This is likely to be the first key term agreed in principle between the buyer and the vendor and really sets the stage for moving forward and nutting all the other elements of the sale out. But how do you value your practice to sell? The purchaser will likely have their own views based on the financial information about the dental practice that you disclose to them in the preliminary due diligence. However, it is important that a seller has a meaningful view of what their practice is likely to sell for in the market. Sellers may consider obtaining a valuation, something like obtaining a valuation from a valuer experienced in valuing the practice type of business. However, this can be expensive, Julie. It's usually 10,000 or more. That it will be that. Yeah. But they do a good job in valuing your business. And the other way we also find is that to assist in negotiations with the purchaser, if the seller has a good accountant who's experienced in working with dental industry clients, they may obtain a view. The seller may obtain a view from the accountant about this, or the purchaser, or sometimes have the accountants of each of the purchaser and the seller to talk and try to reach agreement about the basis on which the business should be valued. So if the seller is engaging a business broker experienced in selling dental practices, he or she may also have a view about the purchase price. So we are looking at there are various ways that we can utilize to help to determine the price. So valuer is the first one, which is pretty expensive, but they are experts in those fields. But you can also go to the accountant, the purchasers will have their own accountant, and then the seller should have their own as well, and then they could talk. And the last one is the business broker who is experienced in selling dental practices. They will have,
I agree that we need to get more opinions than just the accountant. It's been my experience, limited as it is. I have gone through a sales process in one way or the other, participated in that maybe 6, 7, 8 times. But it has been my experience that accountants can be very conservative and base their version of evaluation on figures and figures alone. However, I really do encourage people to go out there and get a broker involved, and also speak to colleagues who've gone through the process both as a seller and as a buyer as well. What has gone into increasing the potential of this practice or the viability of this practice that hasn't got anything to do with the figures themselves. For example, a common way of valuing a practice, certainly for accountants, is to go through the EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization. And it's usually kind of anywhere between 3.5 to up to 6.5 times EBITDA, which is the valuation. However, you could have two practices that have exactly the same EBITDA valuation. One has been around for 20 years, the other one's only been around for 5 years. The other one has great parking and the ability to expand and add on other surgeries if you get really busy. The other one does not. One is in an area which is very family oriented and the services are all family oriented services. The other one is more cosmetic and it's in an area where there's not a huge market for those kind of services. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, at the end of that day, the valuation on the practice that has got the room and potential for growth, it's got the great car parking, that's had some really great marketing campaigns put in place, it has a terrific team that's been loyal for a long, long period of time, and the other practice that doesn't have have all of those benefits, they will have a wildly different valuation. And when we're talking about a valuation, that's like a starting point, because a practice will be purchased by a buyer for a huge range of different prices just for the one practice, because they see what they can do, what the potential they can realize within that practice. And so it ends up being the value of a practice is what someone is willing to buy it for, and so that other person's willing to sell it for, isn't it?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, because I think we all know how tricky it is to get the right price, and there's no right or wrong answer. There's no one size fits all. That's important to know. And I think most importantly, we will know that the price will also be dictated by how much the seller wants to sell and how much the purchaser would want to purchase. So exactly like you were so spot on, like you've got the equipment, but they don't want that kind of facilities, or it just depends on what is their appetite. And we will always say that talk to people who are experienced in gauging the price. The more you talk to, the better it goes. It might not be correct, but still there's a benchmark that you might not be wrong either. So let's go on. Let's move on to the other thing that I wanted to talk about now is also on the pre-contract side. I thought I would mention the Burke and Associates Lawyers has a digital form which can assist the vendor in their preparation for the due diligence and the pre-contract stage. We will make available to your listeners, Julie.
Great.
So we have that digital form where your clients can fill it out, which we can prepare the vendor with the due diligence and have a feel about things that they need to be aware of, things that we will be aware of as well to help them in their process. Yeah, cool. Sorry. Let's get back to the process. We have spoken about the price. This is the process that we want to know. So what's the process from when the parties sign the sale of business contract to settlement? So the critical steps are, first, the purchaser. We encourage the vendor to get the purchaser to pay a deposit, and the purchase price, obviously the balance to the vendor. I mean, that would be the most ideal. And then the second one is the vendor transferring the dental practice intellectual property to the purchaser. So this is another point that we look at as well, transfer of intellectual property. The third one that we would deal with would be dealing with the dental practice premises, which could be granting a new lease or transferring the existing lease, or it could involve the purchaser buying the practice premises as well. If these are owned by the vendor, the seller, there will likely be subleases as well, and licenses to practitioner business operating at the premises to be transferred. So
those are all really key areas that the seller really does need to try to solidify as much as possible. This is what evaluation is based on partially as well. That is it going to be possible for that lease to be transferred? If they were a preferred provider with certain health funds, can that be transferred? Because if you go through all the negotiations and then you start to be in communication with your landlord and they say, nah, I'm going to be selling this place in a year's time, for example, when your natural lease was up, I won't be taking on any more longer term leases, then all of a sudden all that negotiation has been wasted time.
Absolutely. So that's why I think they have to be, you have to do this first. Like it's a heads up that you must do, because if you don't control the premises, and that's where the patients come, you can't operate your business. So it's so vital that the vendor has to be switched on in remembering that the lease is one of the important components. As long as you don't own it, that should be dealt first. Like it's not in your control, that should be the item that you should deal with. Like lease is not within your control if you don't own the premises. And then we spoke about the license to be transferred. So if you've got an X-ray machine, then obviously you've got the radiation licensing that the license that has to be transferred. So there's a transfer of management license, we call it. And then you have to apply to the radiation licensing department, which we can help with as well. And then you've got a radiation management plan, which my colleague George Hanger has previously spoken in September 2021. Yeah, these are the things that you would think about as a vendor, and you want your ducks to line up in a row before settlement happens. And then the next thing is that the vendor will be providing all plant and equipment to the purchaser. as has been represented, think about the plant and equipment. That would also involve the stock. Stock is very important in dental practice businesses. So what about the stock? Is it included in the purchase price? Or if it's not, what about valuation of the stock? So there are many things that you need to consider as well in this aspect. And then the next one will be obviously employees. Is the vendor going to terminate employment, and is the buyer going to take on employees, transferring employees across? That would be also another area that's important to be dealt with, because it involves obviously compliance with law on this side to make sure that the employees are transferred across correctly with the right super entitlements, leave pays and stuff like that. Long service leave, of course, that comes into play. That's important to be agreed upon.
And those sort of long service leave, as an example, you can have within your sales contract that the previous vendor pays a percentage of the long service leave of very loyal employees, where the employee served, for example, I think it's due. I think it's payable now after 7 years. So if they had been working 5 years under this previous employer, the vendor, then they agree to pay a percentage when long service leaves does come up. They agree to pay a percentage of that long service leave. So those sort of complexities around employee transfer are very important to get right at the very start, because you don't want to be a couple of years into your practice ownership and all of a sudden you're lumped with 2 or 3 long service leave claims that are coming up. And I think it's worth noting with employees, one of the questions is, should I bring my own team on board as a buyer, or should I take on the existing employees? And Charles Coves, my husband, co-founder of JPPS, and he's a motivational guru and wonderful person, great in business. He has the theory that there are benefits and drawbacks, equal number of benefits and drawbacks to every situation. That's going to be the case when you're buying or selling a dental practice, when you are choosing to keep on a team or cease out their employment and bring on a new team members. There's going to be equal number of benefits and drawbacks to every scenario. Never look for the ideal buyer, the ideal practice, the ideal everything, because it's all about recognizing where those benefits are and can you really tap into that and make that truly valuable.
Absolutely, because it just depends on what you want to achieve. That's always important. What is your commercial goals, what is that you want to achieve, and how you want to play it out, because again, there's no right or wrong answer. You can have your own people, you can have those people that have been there working, knowing what the culture environment is, and the whole idea is, it's a balancing act. You need to think about it, and at the end, more important is what are the benefits that you would achieve from there. You want to make the employees happy as well. Like, that's also important, because these are the people that are really working for you. And so it is important to consider this point. And employees are people, they are not objects. So it's very tricky, it's very sensitive. So that has to be dealt correctly. So that's one.
And would you, do you have an opinion when we're talking about people who are looking to sell their dental practice? One of the questions that was posed to me was, should I be telling my team members from early on that these are my plans? What if they get scared and quit, or what if they get upset and their attitude shifts and changes? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yes, we have encountered different situations with different transactions, sale and purchase. It just depends on what is the timing there. Like, it depends on what is the circumstance. We usually advise them to tell earlier. I'm actually, I would advocate for that as well, because if there's anything that's not right, you could still fix it. Like, some people want to keep it a secret until the point of time when it's ready. But sometimes it's a bit too late. People have to be notified earlier so that then they can decide, and they can make an informed judgment about the decision about what they want to do. So the earlier you tell your employees, yes, some of them might get upset, but it's for the growth and expansion of the business. It's not sidelining anyone. The employees, if they're told earlier, mentally they're prepared, they can think about it. Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? Am I being sidelined? Am I being demoted? There are many things that would allow the employees to think about. And the more time you give to the employees to think about, I think the lesser you're exposed to any claims. So we would encourage, if you can, and if the position of the nature of the circumstances allow you to disclose, we usually encourage, like, tell the employees a bit, earlier, so that they understand, and they can make a decision that's reasonable about what they want to do. And it's always, I think by nature, we want early notice. Like, I don't want someone to tell me at the last minute that, oh, this is going to happen. That's not a good surprise. That's nasty. No.
Yeah, and it kind of compromises the trust, I believe. We spend a lot of time building up these trusting relationships that we've got. And if we use a different frame to help listeners think of it a little bit differently, if I was in a loving relationship with my husband, which I am, and we've got a trusting relationship, then I will be responding to him and behaving around him in a certain way. However, if I didn't trust him, my behavior would be wildly different.
Yeah.
And I think the same can be true in any relationship that we have. And so if you delay telling your team members until it's, far down the track, then you are compromising that element of trust, and we respond and behave differently. And when team members feel like that trust is broken down, they enter into the relationship with you looking out for their own back primarily, because they know that you're not doing it for them. And that affects the kind of team you can maintain. You want to be able to transfer a team with a great culture, get along with each other, care about each other.
Yeah.
It's also diminishing the impact that the team members could have. Team members generally, we always have the weird people in society that are antisocial and cause trouble and things, but the wild majority want to see each other successful and happy, and they care for each other, especially if they've been working with each other for a long period of time. And so they can actually facilitate the whole process, help support the owner through the process as well, and make sure they're also being a bit salespeople for the practice when the potential buyers come through to do a walkthrough or what have you, that they can see this lovely unified team, picture themselves in there being included in this lovely team as well. So I think that, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Do what you can to maintain the trust of your employees, tell them early, and allow them to have a reaction. It might be negative, but allow them to have a reaction, but then support each other through the process so you can come back to that nice, happy, caring space again.
I agree, 100%. It goes back to the basic principles of being human. So to have a good relationship is always being transparent, Nothing is hidden from anyone. And then communication will be the second key. I always believe, like, if you can have both of them, it's gonna be having a good outcome. So if you're not transparent about,
Amen.
And you're not transparent, you don't unless there are reasons why you can't disclose the sale, there are compelling reasons that you can't, then obviously you can't do it. But if there are no compelling reasons, I think you should do it. And then, like you say, there's a lot of trust involved built over the years. You don't want that to be going down the drain for just one failure to disclose. So that's a bit silly.
Yeah. It does bring that humanity back into play again. I like that.
Yeah. Cool. The next one, employee. So the next one, we will also say, if agreed, the vendor will have to provide additional information to the purchaser about the practice before settlement. I think that's what we will advise the vendor to do. The more, if you're going to be 100% selling, I think the more information you feed to the purchaser, it makes the purchaser more comfortable, more confident about the sale. The whole idea is, like, once you're determined to sell it, the next thing you have to do is to make sure the sale goes through. So I think that it's important that you give additional information. And then obviously, if there's any security interest that's registered over the business, you have to start arranging that to be released. So we quite commonly see, we call the security interest as PPSR. That's all present and all present and acquired over the property, but over the business, over the equipment. So that one is where you, as a vendor, you need to get the release from the bank or whichever lender has that security interest, and you have to arrange that to be released on or before settlement. So it's like a mortgage over your house. If you're selling your house, the purchaser can't buy with the mortgage. No way. I mean, unless the purchaser agrees to, which won't happen, I guess. Like, who wants to take over your liabilities? So that's another release that we need to arrange for the vendor. And obviously then the vendor has to provide access to the premises at settlement by having the keys, access codes, passwords. So things that we will usually have to think about. This will be on the practical side of handing over, but still you have to do it. Then, like I've mentioned, the parties will conduct a stock take. When is that done? Don't do it last minute. Do it earlier if you can, as usual. Get a price agreed, or if can't, valuation to be conducted if the parties don't agree to that. It just depends on the size of the sale. Like if there are many stocks that you have to be assessed, then obviously you probably want to get a valuation. If not, then parties can agree, look at it and stuff. Then the last one, no, the second last actually, the vendor transferring any existing business contracts with third parties. This will also be utility accounts to be transferred or new accounts in the name of the purchaser to be established, like, your electricity, gas, or even your internet, whatever that has to be used to run the business. So, but the business contracts we are more concerned about would be any main contracts with the suppliers that the purchaser will want for the supply of the plant and equipment. And then lastly, we also asked the question, is the vendor required to assist in the business post-settlement? So some of them would require, some may not. So vendor just have to be switched on if that is required. Then that's part of the negotiation of the sale and purchase of the business.
There seems to be so much to look after, which is why it's such a beautiful idea to get your lawyer involved, because you will just plod along reacting and responding to all the requests for information and activity that you need to do as a seller. And those prompts will appear naturally, organically, and directed by accountants, lawyers, brokers, etc., and the potential buyer as well. And I agree, provide as much information as possible for that buyer, because that's about what you were talking about earlier too, about transparency. When there's transparency, there's trust. And when you start to hold back on information, then all of a sudden you can ring alarm bells, either consciously or subconsciously, in that buyer of why is all the information not just freely available when I'm making quite a substantial potential purchase here. So at what point should a seller involve their lawyer in the sales process?
So let's say, I think that's a very good question. We would want the vendor to engage us as soon as possible. Usually the vendor would engage the business broker because they want someone to solicit, to sell the business. And what happens in some business, I think what happens is in our workspace, the business broker would actually call us and say that, hey, I've got a vendor that wants to sell the dental practice. Would you be able to draw up the contract for sale? So that's how it gets started. And it also depends on some purchasers would require due diligence to be conducted. And that's where they already gotten their lawyers to be involved. And then the vendor would have to appoint someone to represent the vendor. So that would be very early stage. If there's a due diligence that is to be conducted by the purchaser, will be already involved because someone has to facilitate that. Or unless they want to do it themselves. It just depends. So that would be like, we can come in at any time, but obviously our advice is the earlier that we get involved, the more things that we can spot and lesser things to do down the road. So we have also encountered where the contract has been drawn up, it comes to us just for settlement, transfer the lease, transfer the employees. That's not ideal, to be honest, because we have to pick up whatever that's there in the contract. So let's say if the contract has missed on a clause that we want, then, it gets a bit messy. So, and then you got to do, variation or whatever if it's not handled properly from the start. So if we can be involved as early as possible, it's just like if you see a doctor, I'm sure you see when you have the first symptom, not at the point where you're suffering and coughing and So you would go like, oh, this is getting a bit bad now. Like I really need to go. Early symptom is always good because then you have an early treatment. So treat us like the doctors, no different. You go to a dentist, you go at the first point when you feel like there's something funny, there's something wonky about my tooth now. You don't go when it's like, oh my God, I can't even open my mouth to speak. Same concept, nothing has changed.
So is it ideal for the vendor, the seller of the practice, to have their lawyers draw up the sales contract?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because well, we even have clients that draw up themselves. Like they just want to save costs.
Wow, what a risky one to take on your own shoulders.
We usually tell them like, oh, this is not there, this is not there, and they're like, oh. But it is risky. Like we see all sorts of people, Julie, to be honest. It just depends on, what's the drive and financial factor, timing. There's just so many factors that will play out. So like I said, the earlier they come to us, we will draft an agreement that we already know what we want. You know what I mean? That we will not miss out. Like we will make sure the lease is there, the employees are there, license are there. So it is crucial for us to make sure that, these things are all done even before signing, not at the stage of signing or, So the earlier you get onto us, the earlier it is for the better for everyone.
That makes perfect sense because you need to have, there are sections of this sales process and you need to have the experts in their particular areas managing all of those different elements. And one of the things that the accountant can really contribute to as well is helping with cash flow projections for different scenarios and providing all of the data to help the buyer understand the true value of the dental practice and the potential value of the dental practice too. So everyone can play quite an active role in this to get a very happy outcome for everyone involved.
That was a good point as well, Julie, because we also get this kind of request from the accountants. So they would have spoken to an accountant about what are the tax implications if I purchase or if I sell, for instance. And then the accountant would say, hey, we have someone that wants to sell, wants to purchase, and then can you do that agreement for them? So the other thing that we get from is the accountant besides the business broker, and they will say, oh, we've got this thing because they want to talk about their tax and financial implications, fair enough. And then we will help with the legal documents. So it is. The thing is, it's not just lawyers that are involved, accountants are involved as well, business brokers. It's actually all of us working towards the same goal, like, it's for a sale and we'll make sure that the sale is done properly. Vendor purchasers are happy about it. They got what they wanted. One sell-off, one is going to inherit a new business. I mean, it's exciting for both parties.
Yeah. And one of the things that can happen with a seller, if it's not due to illness or death, for example, if it's not an urgent sale, then there would be sellers out there that decide one day I'm going to sell, one day I'm going to sell, and then you think, oh yeah, I might sell like in a couple of years' time. And so they start to wind down their rostered hours a little bit, give themselves a bit more free time, maybe not purchase as many new equipment upgrades, etc. moving forward, maybe not go so heavy on stocking as well and having spare stock on the shelves. And all of those things are totally understandable. That would be the approach. But to get top dollar for your dental practice, you are better off keep going full steam ahead right up until that point of sale and then start to readjust things in your personal life, because so much of those initial valuation figures are going to be based on the turnover of the practice. So it's not a time to go down to 3 days a week unless that's where your benefit is, that's where part of your kind of payment in quotation marks is, then it's totally reasonable. But do consider that if you're taking a long time to decide when you're actually going to sell and you start to cater down your hours without replacing your hours with another practitioner, it's going to really have a substantial impact on the figures that are supplied to any buyer to justify your ideal sale figure.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. That's absolutely spot on. And so, like, for instance, it depends on really what the parties want. And because we've seen, like, we had a client in the New South Wales who sold a group of practices she owned a number of years ago. Well, she was so happy because she was able to do what she wanted to do. So she achieved a good sale price from the corporate who bought her group. Following this, she stayed on and worked non-clinically in the corporate side for a number of years. She then left and went back into clinical in a freelance capacity for a short time and is now enjoying the flexibility of this. More time with family and for herself whilst exploring her next opportunity in non-clinical medical related businesses and medical technology. So if done correctly, the sale of your dental practice can provide so much opportunity when it is the right time to do something different. So I wouldn't, like you say, it just depends. Like either you want to leave it completely or you want to scale down and have lesser hours. There's just so much you can do about your sale of business. And
yeah, and if you're willing to hang around for some sessions for a particular period of time, that all boosts up that valuation. That's another thing, another element over and above a financial valuation alone that can really add further value to the valuation and the sale price as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll just talk about quickly, how we have mentioned the key points, the lease, business premises, and employees entitlement and stock. There are the three main areas that I'm just going to highlight to your listeners so that they are just aware, like these are the issues that we will usually look at. So the first one is the business premises. One of the key issues that arises in every sale of business is with respect to the business premises and how it is to be dealt with in the sale. If you have a lease of the dental practice premises, you will need to get permission from the landlord, which we have spoken about, to assign the lease to the purchaser, or permission from the landlord to grant a new lease to the purchaser. So it can be an assignment of an existing or a new lease. If there are head licensing, leasing, subleasing, and licensing arrangements for all or part of the premises, there may be a number of permissions, consents, and transfer they require to occur by settlement. It is important for a vendor to arrange this otherwise after the sale of business settles. If it can't without this permission or consent, which is rare, the vendor there's a risk there, remaining committed under a lease for a business that it no longer owns. So it's very crucial that the vendor gets the consent from the landlord before, going deeper into the sale. Where we are often involved in negotiating with the landlord's solicitors to arrange for transfer of the lease or putting in place a new lease and any other necessary consents regarding the right to use the premises for the new purchaser and the removal of risk in the premises for the vendor. So with dental practices, there could be subleases to dental support providers to deal with and licenses to dental practitioners to deal with, all of which we will usually require landlord's consent prior to the settlement in some form. So again, lease is something that we have to look at, which we are, we have the experience, we're experienced in handling that, which we always negotiate with the landlord's representative or solicitors, and then we get that surely good enough, early enough in place so that, there won't be a hiccup in the settlement.
Nice.
So that's one thing that we look at. Yeah, and the other one that's important, what about employees' entitlement?
Yeah.
So employees' entitlement, the employees in this business will likely all have some element of accrued entitlements, such as annual leave, personal, sick or carers leave, and with long-term employees, long service leaves, which are spoken about as well. What is important is whether the employees are being transferred to the new purchaser or not. I mean, if it's not transferred, then the seller will have to settle and pay out the entitlements. If the employees are transferred, there's usually an adjustment to the purchase price, which the parties can agree, in favor of the purchaser to cover the employee accrued entitlements, which are liabilities which will usually transfer to the purchaser at settlement. Then it is important that the purchaser informs the vendor of his decision about what employees it seeks to retain or not well in advance of settlement, so that the vendor can either give the proper notice, which we spoke about as well, how early the notice should be, to employees to terminate their employment or make the necessary adjustments in the purchaser's favor for any entitlements owed to the employees being retained by the business that will transfer to the purchaser at settlement. So the earlier we give notice, I think the better we are prepared to deal with it. So if it's not transferred across, it's very clear. But if it's going to be transferred across, entitlements are to be calculated, adjustments to be made.
Beautiful.
And then that's also to make sure that the liabilities go with the purchaser, and then whatever that the seller is exposed to is also concluded at that point in time, is settled. Then Megan spoke further about adjustments and employee entitlements in that previous episode with you, so I won't go into further detail about them here. Yeah. So finally, the stock. We have spoken that is to could be considered as well. As a dental practice owner, you should always consider the stock that needs to be sold with the practice. For example, there are many things like gloves, hand gels, stringents, and other dental or health-related consumables. The plant and equipment will be on their own. This is just on stock now. As a vendor, you should consider whether the value of the stock is included in the purchase price, or if the purchaser will be required to pay extra for the stock, which we spoke about as well. What is also important to consider and agreed in the contract of sale is how the stock is valued. Perhaps the parties will complete a stock take together, or a sum will be agreed, or maybe an independent valuer will be appointed to complete the stock take. There will be additional costs and time involved in completing a stock take or engaging a valuer to do this. However, at least this will give accuracy in terms of the true value of the stock. I mean, we are relying on the experts to do it. So
yeah, and when you think about expiry dates and materials that may be in stock, but the equipment that's used to utilize that stock is broken down, and there's a few things to consider. And little bits by little bit, if you have to start replacing all these things when you've purchased the practice, the cost can really blow out. So to provide that assurance as a seller is a great thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's important to know, because you don't want expired items sitting around and then you have to pay for that. After the stock take is conducted by the parties together, or their suitable representatives at the close of business on the day before settlement, that is when it is certain that settlement will occur the following day. You can do 2 or 3 days before, but as long as you're sure when settlement is going to happen, do it closer to that date. If settlement is delayed for any reason and a stock take is conducted the night before, this can cause wasted time and cost, as this will then need to occur again the night before settlement actually occurs. So we always say do it the moment you know when settlement is going to happen. Like if the purchaser needs funding, is coming, and then settlement is going to happen, do it 1 day before rather than 2-3 days. It just depends on what the parties are happy to agree on as well. And the last one, if the vendor is selling the dental practice, we want to make sure that there's a release of guarantee that's provided by the vendor, and we always have clauses in there to safeguard that limitation of liability on the part of the vendor. So if the vendor is going to get out of the business, really the vendor shouldn't be liable for anything except for malpractices, negligence, gross negligence, and stuff like that, willful default. But other than that, in the ordinary course of things, we will make sure that the vendor is not going to have any liability hanging over their heads when they sell the business. So that's important. So I've spoken about what are the things that we need to know about. And then I did say that there was a client that was happy about what they have to achieve. So this is coming to an end of what I'm going to say, I think. And I was thinking, Julie, do you have any further questions that you would like to ask?
Now, you were talking about a digital form, a pre-contract digital form that Burke and Associates are making available to our listeners. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So it's actually... because if that's for people that haven't come through the business brokers, or they have not come through the accountant. So we have no information about what they're selling. And this digital form is a list of questionnaire that we have set out that will prompt the vendor to give us information that we will require to put into the agreement.
Great.
So it's sort of like put it simply, it's a mini due diligence for us on the vendor using that form, so that we understand what the vendor is selling. Like if let's say there are excluded assets that we're not aware of, and then we put into the contract, I mean, that's so wrong. So we want to make sure that we capture everything. It's just like interviewing the vendor, like, tell me, what do you have? How much you want to sell? What about employees? What's the position of the lease? Instead of having this interview with them, we already have this form that is aimed at getting information, feedback from them, so that we can understand what they want to sell, and then we will then consider issues around it to make sure that we have the full information, and then we'll put into the agreement. It is also helpful in a way, like this digital form will also assist when the purchaser wants to do a due diligence. Same scenario where we can use this digital form and it will generate information that we need to respond to the purchaser's solicitors. So this is a form that we have thought about long time ago about what we need. Very probably not too exhaustive, but it's still very good, very good. It covers the main points that a sale of vendor would involve.
Great. And we'll make sure that in the show notes there is a link to that digital form as well, so people can go in there, download it and have a look. And if anybody out there doesn't have a lawyer, they are looking to sell their dental practice, are you the best point of contact?
Yes. So your listener can call me or contact me or Megan. Both of us are into dental practices businesses anyway, so we are more than happy to help. So in the meantime, I'm also currently working on some other topics that I would love to share with your listeners in the coming months when they're ready. Working in progress.
That sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. It's such a wonderful connection to have with Burke and Associates. The legal side of things impacts everything that we do within business. And I truly appreciate the contribution, the ongoing contribution that your organisation has with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. As usual, it has been a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you so much again. So if your listeners do have any questions or I can be of any assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us. More than happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liz. And you keep your health up. Keep your health up now that the COVID's gone.
I will. It is what it is. Thanks, Julie. Bye.
Thanks so much, Liz. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, then you should come along and join the club. The club is a whole library of lunch and learns with new lunch and learns being produced all the time that help your dental team gain greater success in your systems, in your team behaviours, in your patient management, in your patient engagement, in their treatment plans. They are usually around half an hour in length, and so team members can sit down, be paid for their lunch break, eat lunch while they're being inspired and delivered all of these insights and strategies that can be implemented so you all achieve greater levels of success. Also, Amina and I, my buddy from Dental Management Expertise, have a company, Dental Business Mastery, together. And our flagship online 1-year course for dental practice managers and dental practice owners to learn how to very successfully manage your dental practice is available. Head over to dentalbusinessmastery.com.au to find out more information, and has information about any other courses that we've got available. Also, make sure you do jump onto my website, julieparkerpracticesuccess.com.au, and you will see a whole load of free information. There are articles, the blog, downloads, templates, a whole load of things that are designed to help you overcome any specific challenge that you've got going on in your practice at the moment. If you have any suggestions of topics or guests that I can have on the podcast, please let me know. Thanks for listening.